Welcome to Whisper Woods Stories. Our first story is from Lawless Desai. So recently, I think since Sunday, I've been seeing activity around the house, more revolving around me and my room. According to my family, it's been about 20 plus years that it's been paranormally active, since this was happening when my stepdad was in his teen years. They added an upstairs and 2 large rooms as well, quite a long time ago. This paranormal activity doesn't seem to be evil, honestly. We find comfort in it. My stepdad's sisters refuse to even stay in the house past 6 p.m. nowadays. I don't know why, but it just seems to roam the halls. My family and I have been living in this house for a little over 4 years now. I remember moving into it in about September of 2016, maybe mid-September. But anyways, I haven't seen activity in 3 years. Last time I witnessed any activity was in 2017, which was also the first time I had seen it. The first time I was home alone, and my door opened while I was on my phone, and then quickly shut when I looked up. I had just brushed it off, knowing about the invisible friend that just roamed the halls here. The second time, I had been up until about 4 in the morning. I heard men with deep voices talking in the dining room, and chairs being pushed and pulled about. The third time, I witnessed the same thing with a friend who had been staying over on the weekend, and that's when I knew it was real. That was the last time for me, but my mom claims to have witnessed some things too. I guess she woke up and saw a woman at the door of her bedroom that walked over to pet the dog's head. I'm not sure, she might have just been tired. In recent activities, we used to have an inside cat until she somehow got out overnight. All of us claimed that we hadn't let her out, so we still don't know, and it's been since July. Whoever let her out has made her scared of humans though, which is odd because she was never scared of us before. Another recent activity was on Sunday morning. Everyone was asleep, but I was sitting on the porch. I was talking on the phone and the door was shut and locked in place, and it just swung open, making me stop my sentence in place. I took the phone from my ear and walked towards it, and looked behind it to see if one of the kids had opened it, but there was no one there. I walked to my brother's room to see if he was awake. He was, so I asked if he had opened the door, and he said, "Our stepdad probably did. He did go to work this morning." And I said, "He's been at work for hours. He didn't just leave now. I was just outside." Besides, my stepdad wouldn't leave the door open going to work because that's not very secure. Anyways, I checked to see if any of the younger kids were awake. My sister was asleep, but there was one kid awake, so I asked him if he had opened it and he said no. I can tell when any of these siblings are lying. They'd be giggling and saying no if they didn't do anything, so that's when I knew that no one had ever been near the door. Today and last night there was some more activity, but nothing I can catch for sure. But I'm a bit unsure if my family would be doing it because I've had my eye on them all the time. They don't ever turn it off, so it's strange. No, I don't really think it's anything evil, but I've been considering setting cameras up. I'm just weirded out about the fact that it started to show itself, and to me? Why specifically me? Nobody else has been witnessing anything lately other than me, so I don't know. Maybe it's just telling me something, or maybe it just wants to be around me a little more. Our second story is from Veron 1-on-1. Ever since I was a child, my grandma has had this copper train. It was old-fashioned in style with the typical smokestack on the front of it. It is made out of sheet metal copper. It was almost a foot long, maybe 6 inches tall. The front driver's side wheel winds up to play the music box inside of it. The only song it plays is Working on the Railroad. When my grandma passed away, it was one of the few things of hers that I still kept. It is very sentimental to me as I loved her very, very much. I can still remember being around 7 years old, telling her that when I got older, I was going to marry her and we would move to Missouri together. As a younger boy, all I understood was love, not marriage. Years went by and that fateful day happened when she passed away. I brought home just a few things from her house to remember her by, and I told my stepchildren, you absolutely never touch this train. I wound up the music box to stifle their curiosity and let it play once, and that was it. It sat on a shelf for years. No one ever did dare to touch it. While I was married, I did in fact live in Missouri. However, after my divorce, I moved back to Oklahoma. While in Oklahoma, I entered a relationship that was extremely toxic, and after just a few short years, I ended up moving back to Missouri. This is where the train comes in. I moved back to Missouri with no money, no job, no hope. My best friend let me move onto his property into a small house near his. Within 2 weeks, I sat down on my couch to cry. Still, no money, no job. I felt absolutely worthless and hopeless. Just as I sat down in defeat, a few musical notes played from my grandma's train. I instead laughed and felt as if everything would be all right. The next day, I was given a great job offer and everything quickly turned around. The same New Year's Eve, my best friend and a few other friends were partying. The music stopped playing, so everyone's phones came out and a discussion about what to play next quickly ensued. Suddenly, my grandma's train played a few musical notes. Everyone freaked out except for me. That next year was a wonderful one for me. Fast forward to the end of that wonderful year. My best friend's mom had taken over my rent, got mad at me for various reasons, and evicted me. Pissed off and hurt, I found a beautiful townhouse in a small city nearby. It was stressful to move as I was working 60 hours per week while moving, and it was freezing outside. Within a week of moving into my new house, everything was in order, and I heard a few familiar musical notes play. 1 year later, I met a great woman, and within a few days of hanging out, getting to know each other, we were sitting and talking, and the train played a few notes again. She naturally had questions, and I explained the entire story as you've heard so far. Earlier this year, her and I were in a serious fight. We both foolishly took to drinking, which helped out for nothing. Somewhere along the line, I was so angry I left the house to get away from her. I stood outside in my driveway trying to cool off. Within 30 seconds, she came running outside, crying, hugging me, apologizing. I was angry and confused. Was this some kind of game to her? She had decided that she had enough and even went so far as to drunkenly grab a gun of mine. Again, the train played a few notes as she was walking through the living room with it. Luckily for me, my girlfriend didn't know how to use a gun, so it was all good. But not to my grandma. The notes seemed to play against her in that way. Me and my girlfriend are fine now. We've had counseling and such. Fast forward a bit, and last week was a bad one for me. I got my dog spayed and gave it rabies shots. After the operation, it broke my heart because her behavior changed. She just started sleeping all the time. The next day, I twisted my ankle and broke my leg, so here I sit writing this with a full leg cast. The night before last, I was sitting in the living room watching YouTube videos on my phone. My girlfriend was asleep in bed. The video is winding down, and all of a sudden, I hear familiar music playing. I didn't think much of it until I turned to see where the music was coming from. Like a slap in the face, it was my grandma's musical train again. I yelled my girlfriend's name to try to get her attention, but I was only met with silence. I began shaking. I grabbed my crutches and went about 6 feet down the hall, yelling for my girlfriend's name and hoping she wakes up. A few seconds go by and she suddenly flips out, realizing that the train is playing again. This time, my hands were shaking so hard that I could barely hold on to my crutches. Then silence. This train will always break the silence, randomly playing about 4 to 6 notes at such unusual times. This time, I was shaking as it was playing so fast and strong, like someone had just wound it up as far as it could go. I've never wound up this train since I showed my stepkids. It's always sat in silence out of respect for my grandma. Something felt wrong when the notes were playing so quickly, but I feel like my grandma watches over me with it. I still wonder what the significance could be for them playing so fast. Am I going to die? Is some big change getting ready to take place? I'm hopeful, but I have no idea what it means. I feel so worried about the train playing so fast as the other day I had just gotten into a large argument with my mom, and she was recently in an accident on the way to her home. I've heard too many stories of people wishing that they had one last I love you instead of leaving on bad terms. Luckily, the next morning I called her and everything was all right, but I still might buy a lottery ticket. Now I have a little treat for you Whisper Woods listeners. While I was messaging OP to get permission to use this story, he offered to send me a picture of the train. This is the focal point of the story. Spooky, huh? Our third story is from Leader Raptor. This is a story from my childhood and one of the things that to this day still sends a shiver up my spine. My dad has a very small house. It was all he could afford after his divorce. It was built in 1920 and has approximately 4 rooms, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a living room/kitchen. All in all, it's about 595 square feet. My brother and I shared a single bedroom, which was also small to conserve space for bunk beds. I had the top bunk. I was always scared of the room and had a huge fear of the dark. I still kind of do. Back then we had this large dollhouse in the room. It was about 5 feet tall. It sat on the opposite wall at the end of the room. One night I already had a sense of dread, like something was off and unusual, so I was hiding under my covers. But when the air got too hot and stifling, I had to peek my head out. When I did, I looked through the bars of the bunk bed and saw a young boy. He was around my age, standing next to the dollhouse. It was not my brother. He was fast asleep in the bunk below. Quickly after I saw that boy, I ducked my head back under my comforter. My heart was racing and I was breathing heavily. But then after a few minutes of repeating to myself that he wasn't there, ghosts aren't real, and it's just your imagination, I had to check to make sure that what I had seen was gone. But when I finally got the nerve to pull the covers down, it wasn't the dollhouse that I saw, but the boy's face up against the bars of the bunk bed, staring at me. I can't remember if I screamed or just hit again, but I do know that I called for my brother and hit the wall until he woke up. He said he never saw a little boy, and I personally never saw that little boy again. There are even more stories from that room, even dating up to the time from when I moved out this year. Whether it was objects being moved, Christmas lights swaying without a breeze, or a woman standing at the front of my bed. There were a lot of strange experiences. My dad even once saw a child crawl out of the room in underwear, and he yelled at them, thinking it was either me or my brother, but he found us in our room. The house has no history of dying or tragedy that we're aware of. These are just some things that have happened involving the room. Our fourth story is from Faith Annie Acrodelia. Over the course of my life, I've had minor run-ins with the paranormal, mostly sleep paralysis, but none of them have frightened me as much as the following experience. On a hot day in June or July, my boyfriend, now husband, and I were on the way to the park and stopped outside of someone's stoop where a box of books were left. I immediately swooped in and was intrigued by a small, yellow paperback that was titled something like My Haunted House, a Memoir. I love stuff like that, and it makes sense that I gravitated towards it. It's no longer in my possession, unfortunately, but from what I remember, it was locally published by a company based out of Queens in New York. It was written by a woman detailing her experience of being tormented by a demonic entity over nearly a decade and how it affected her life. I wish I could remember more, but I feel like my brain has intentionally scrubbed my mind of it over the years. We made it to the park and had a nice time, ate sushi, had some wine, read books, etc. And once it was dark, we parted ways at the train station. Back then I was a night owl, so I stayed up all night and finished reading the memoir. I set it on a pile of books next to my bed and pulled out my laptop. Now at the time, I was a broke student in the service industry, so there was no AC and the bed was a mattress on the floor. I simply had one of those oscillating towers that I positioned at the end of the bed so it will blow onto my legs and feet with no covers. I had a bad habit of lying down with my laptop balanced on my chest and my head 6 inches from the screen, and that night was no different. I spent the next hour or so watching Netflix, scrolling through news sites, and so on. But suddenly I realized that there was no air blowing on my legs anymore. Pulling the screen down, I saw that the fan was no longer there. In fact, it was now on the left side of my bed, closer to my closet. Immediately, I felt overwhelmed by fear and terror. There was a shift in the air, and I'm whispering, "Oh my God." While trying to process the fact that the damn thing nearly moved 10 feet across the room on its own, I saw my rabbit, who was in his cage, and was losing it. He was running everywhere, shaking the cage with his teeth and thumping like crazy. I started hyperventilating as the fan started to move towards me. It felt as though whatever was there was taunting me, and I was probably feeding into it with my reaction. The heavy and malicious energy filled my room that night, and it will never leave my memory. It was pure hatred. I feel sick even when I think about it. I got my breathing under control and called my best friend/roommate in tears, asking what I should do while trying to avoid attracting attention to my tears. I know, this story highlights just how much of a baby I am. I don't remember our conversation, but it calmed me down somehow. Afterwards, I called my boyfriend and asked him to spend the night. The fan moved another couple of inches towards the bed as I tried to slink off the end of it. I dragged my rabbit's cage out of the living room, grabbed the book, locked the bedroom, and ran out of there. On the way, I threw the book into a trash can. To this day, I'm convinced that something was attached, since it was the only thing that had changed in my home environment. I returned later to sage and bless the apartment, while politely asking them to leave just in case. Interestingly, in reading horoscopes, they've mentioned that it's in my best interest to avoid the occult and paranormal, as I am somewhat of a target of it for some reason. I've heeded that advice since, and dealt with minor occurrences with as little engagement as possible. Thank you for listening. This experience still weighs on me despite its duration / how long ago it occurred. It's nice to share it with like-minded individuals. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing below. It'll help me know if you want to see more of this content in the future. Don't let the shadows get too close.